the late 80s in the NFC was just like the heyday of the pass rusher.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Charles Haley was dominant in an era that just, had Hall of Famers galore who played the same position as him.
Well, it made the pass rusher what it is today. Like, they laid that groundwork of, like, these are, like, the best that you're probably going to see kind of thing.
Yeah, and it was all in one conference. I mean, you had the 85 and late 80s Bears, but you also had Lawrence Taylor and the Giants, and then Dexter Manley and Charles Mann for the Redskins. Kevin Green was playing for the Rams at that time, just, kicking the crap out of people. And then Charles Haley.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's kind of lost in the shuffle of that 49ers defense because, that was kind of a group of really good players, but outside of like Ronnie Lott, nobody was, had that type of clout and name recognition. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Every time somebody brings up LT, I just think of how bad the drugs must have been in the 80s and early 90s in the NFL on those offensive and defensive lines. They must have just been like so much drugs.
Dude, steroids and coke.
Yeah.
Like, that was that era of the NFL.
Wonder what that combo's like. Like, people are like, oh, man, you got to do coke and shrooms, bro. And you're just like, I wonder what steroids and coke is. Just like uppers and then more uppers.
Just like, I'm going to run through this brick wall, but I'm going to do it with my face.
Yeah, exactly. You know those PCP stories that get over-exaggerated?
Yeah.
Those are steroid and coke stories.
I'm like 100% sure you're right. Okay. Everybody, welcome to the Sports Experience Podcast, where we take a look at certain characters in professional sports and discuss things people may not know about them. Today's subject is former defensive lineman, outside linebacker Charles Haley, and with me today, Dom DiTolla, is
Chris Quinn.
So let's just dive in, head first into arguably one of the best pass rushers of his generation and arguably one of the most insane people of his generation.
Well, this was interesting. I saw that he wasn't recruited very highly into college.
No.
And he wasn't a pass rusher when he was being recruited. He got switched to outside lineman
Yeah, I mean, they kind of played him everywhere. He was just like an athlete, kind of like a late bloomer.
Yes.
I mean, when you're 6'5" and you're like 220 coming out of high school and you're eventually 250, you have the size to become a pretty elite defensive player, kind of no matter where they put you, just due to your athleticism. And when he went to James Madison, which is a 1AA school in Virginia, they're usually pretty good. I mean, what's his name was his teammate from the posse for the Redskins, wide receiver Gary Clark. Mm-hmm. So they usually have some,
NFL type players, but they are a AA program or whatever you want to say.
1AA, yeah, or
AA.
FCS championship, whatever PC name they're giving it now. But yeah, it's not like an Alabama where you have like 30 people on your team who could go pro, but you maybe have like one or two every like 4-year recruiting class type deal. And just absolutely tore it up. There was a good story about Bill Walsh scouting him. He like walked into the scouts meeting and he put on the Charles Haley film, and he's just playing everywhere on the field, just straight up dominating for James Madison. And he's like, this is Charles Haley. He's going to be on our defense next year. And they went and took him in, I believe, the fourth round of the 86 draft. Yeah.
Which, it's one of those things where I don't think he would drop that low nowadays.
No.
But it's where the NFL kind of changes, where you see a guy that you're just like, well, we can play him throughout our defense. That is so valuable.
Yeah.
That they probably take him second round. Not necessarily first round, but yeah.
Yeah, and scouting, nowadays is way more advanced. You have tape on everybody, like no matter what division you're playing at. So maybe even jumped into the first round if he did all like the national combines and everything like that. Because you look at him and his athletic build and frame, and you go, nowadays, you'll notice this guy.
Yeah, they'll make the skills that they want because the athleticism is there. I actually saw that the 49ers didn't cut him, but dropped him because he had a slow 40-yard dash right off the bat, and then they had him take another one, and he dropped like 4 or 5 tenths of a second off of his 40-yard dash, and they were like, oh, he probably just wasn't even trying.
Oh, yeah, no. Like
that's the kind of guy he seems like. He's like, well, I really don't give a shit about this 40-yard dash, so jam it up your ass.
Just put me on the field.
Yes.
Watch the tape.
Watch the tape.
Yeah, just watch the tape, watch what I can do, and I'll be an incredible player. I mean, his rookie year, he was an all-rookie player for San Francisco. And by year 3, their Super Bowl winning team in '88, where they beat the Bengals that year on a Montana last-second comeback, he was starting. I mean, he was a valuable member of that defense.
Yes, definitely.
Just just go over some stats here. I mean, 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, Defensive Player of the Year in 1990. I mean, he was the defensive force in the front 7 for San Francisco. Like, there was Ronnie Lott on the back end, and then there was Charles Haley during those late 80s Super Bowl runs.
And correct me if I'm wrong, was he the first person to win 5 NFL Super Bowls? So like the current.
Yeah.
So I know we can go back to those old Green Bay Packers teams and all these older pre-NFL, games or world championships, but I'm pretty sure he's the first 5-time NFL champion.
Yeah, before Brady, there was no one that could touch him. Yeah. He had 5.
Because he was on the San Francisco team.
And then we'll get into why he left San Francisco.
Yeah, we'll get into that story, but he was in the San Francisco team, and then he went to that Dallas team that was so great, and he was a great,
Deion Sanders had a great quote about him, who was his teammate. He's like, he won 5 Super Bowls. He wasn't just on the team. I mean, he was starting.
Yes.
I mean, he was just an absolute wrecking ball. Like, in his first 6 seasons in San Francisco, the dude had 63.5 sacks.
Which is insane.
And let me break this down to some of our listeners who aren't really familiar with the NFL as far as, pass rushing is concerned, particularly in that era. The late 80s is where you really saw it, because 82 they started actually recording sacks as an official stat. Charles Haley was wrecking stuff in an era where in the NFC in particular, which the 49ers play in, you had those dominant Bears defenses. You had the Giants with a coked up Lawrence Taylor. You had Charles Mann and Dexter Manley, who we should do an episode on.
Yeah.
Just, same as Lawrence Taylor in terms of drug use and dominance in Washington. And then Kevin Green, who I loved growing up as a Steelers fan, but he was with the Rams at that time, just absolutely wrecking everything. And Haley was part of that group. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer with those guys.
Yeah, he almost has a sack per game in that 6 years.
And in his postseason, he was always productive too. It's never like the guy just, took it down a scotch. He just upped his game.
Yeah.
He upped his game.
One of the best defensive players of his era, if not of all time. That's what the question, because of his off-field antics, that's what the question keeps surrounding him is, would he be looked at in a higher light if he didn't have all these shenanigans? And we're going to get into those shenanigans.
I mean, the guy finished with 100.5 sacks for a career.
It's crazy.
If you're in triple digits, you're in the Hall of Fame. I mean, and the cool thing about him is, as far as football strategy goes, this might bore some of you, this might interest some of you. He kind of became the first elephant position in George Seifert's defense when he was coaching under Walsh, to where because of his size, speed, technique, everything, you not only could play him at defensive end down, you could play him at outside linebacker up, and then you could even kick him on the interior to beat, slower guards, centers, and interior linemen just with his speed. I mean, you could play him essentially everywhere, and he would get to the quarterback and just play solid against the run.
That's something that I don't necessarily understand as much because I never played football. But when you see anybody playing multiple positions, I mean, 2 positions is kind of but anything like that where you're just like, you can start on the line, you can start back, it's kind of ridiculous. And in that era of players not doing this, he was really the mold that, set it up.
Yeah, and if you have anybody that can play, I mean, now a lot of base defenses are based in nickel and, extra defensive backs. But like at that time, if you have a guy who can dominate in a 3-4 or 4-3 alignment, that's just a cornerstone for your franchise.
Yeah, that was the thing. He wasn't just doing good. He was dominating.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it was like for the quarterbacks to be like, oh, shit, we're going against the 49ers this year.
Or just like a center. And I think Ronnie Lott was talking about how what they would end up doing is they would base their entire back-end coverages around him. Like wherever he lined up, that's how they would set up their defensive backs as far as what kind of scheme that they were playing. Because, Where's he going to line up? Is he going to pass rush? Is he going to defend the run? Like, what's he going to do? What's the matchup with him against, a single team opportunity, double team opportunity, that type of deal. So
yeah, because he creates mismatches and he creates opportunities for other players to get plays, to do everything that you want in a football scheme.
And as many issues as the man had from a mental perspective, he was just like very football savvy and smart.
Yes, that was something that I read, that he was like, his football intelligence was out of the building.
He knew what everyone on a specific play was supposed to do on defense, not just himself, not just his specific assignment. And he was a very passionate individual who would criticize people if they weren't doing Mike Holmgren, famous Packers and Seahawks coach, was the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach when Haley was in San Francisco. And he said Haley would come into the offensive meetings to learn what offenses were doing because he wanted an understanding of just everything that was going on.
Yeah, he wanted a full understanding. And that's why he was so good.
Yeah. It's not that he was just blessed with so many physical gifts.
Yes.
He made an effort and had the mental part of the game on the field down.
Yeah, I was going to say, because pretty much everybody out there in professional football is blessed with physical gifts. They're all ridiculous athletes. Some of them are slightly more athletic than others, which is kind of ridiculous. But I think where you see players really distancing themselves from other players is really the intelligence and understanding the schemes and understanding exactly where to switch off and exactly what your other players are doing.
Yeah.
And he really understood that.
Definitely.
To a T.
Absolutely. And like I said, that can't be overstated.
Yeah.
What
a great football player he was.
What a great football player. And what a, you want to get into it now, or do you want to take a break on this one?
Let's do a quick break.
This
podcast is brought to you by Mental Health. And if you're in your office and you find yourself masturbating in front of a bunch of your coworkers, you might want to look into getting your mental health checked out,
Absolutely, yeah. Just, go to a psychiatrist. They are everywhere. There are services out there if ever the fancy strikes you during the workday.
Yes, please. Here at the Sports Experience Podcast, we are very pro-psychologist and very pro-working on your mental health. And with that, I think we're going to get into the craziest stories I've ever read about a pro athlete.
So if you'll let me set this up real quick, as I alluded to before, 63 and a half sacks in his first 6 seasons with San Francisco. That should pretty much guarantee you job security with your current employer as an NFL player for as long as you can physically do it.
Yes, he would be the defensive captain.
He would.
You know what I mean? Let's get into it.
Let's talk about what led to Charles Haley leaving San Francisco before the 1992 season. Some certain episodes that happened while he was in the city by the bay.
Just real quick, I wanted to say this. If you want to check out more about Charles and his insanity, the book Boys Will Be Boys has a bunch of great stories.
I cannot state what a great writer that Jeff Pearlman is. Because not only did he do Boys Will Be Boys, he did The Bad Guys Won about the 86 Mets. He did a USFL history. He did a Walter Payton biography. I mean, this guy's a fantastic writer. Jeff Pearlman, you are a great person and someone very much worth reading.
Yes. Do you want to start with San Francisco stories and then get into Dallas? I had one Dallas story that... It's so weird because you can't get these stories confirmed.
Well, let's do chronologically, though.
Okay.
Let's do San Francisco first. So... We recently alluded to masturbating at work.
I think these are like the first, when he starts going off the rails, these are like the first stories that you start to hear.
Yeah, because the thing about Charles is back in the day, I mean, currently he was, just recently, and he's kind of got himself under control, he was diagnosed finally as bipolar.
And had extreme manic depression.
Yeah, so it was manic depression before.
Yes.
So they gave him meds, and the meds would kind of keep him under control, but there were days where he just wouldn't take his meds. He'd go on and off, and when he was off, things happened, particularly because of his nature. He would masturbate during team meetings, and not just like quietly.
No,
either.
It was very vocal and very targeted.
Very targeted. He would talk about players' wives while he was doing it. And also, not just like playing with himself or faking it. He would bust a nut.
Like full on masturbating. There wasn't, you know how some guys are like, oh, there's my dick. Is it a watch? What time is it? Whatever crap. No, he was full on masturbating in teammates' faces, essentially.
Yeah, next to him when they weren't looking. Like they'd be having a conversation with somebody else. And, Joe Montana turns around and there's a giant black cock in his face.
Oh, that was my other question was, how big do you think his cock was? Because he's just fucking wrapping it out 8-9 inches.
At least, dude.
At least, yeah.
Like, I'm sure if someone pissed him off, he gave a few mushroom tattoos.
Oh, I'm sure. Just like, Charles has to stop slapping me with his dick. I swear I'm going to quit.
Like this, let me break it down for everyone listening right now. This guy was Me Tooing his own teammates before #MeToo was a thing.
That's the thing is he was doing these things, and out on the football field, you would be like, oh man, for the opponent, that guy's pretty wild. He's doing it to his own teammates.
Well, I've seen interviews and he's talked about this before, and like some of his teammates were like, that's just the guy that he was though. Like not the jacking off part. That's not cool or whatever, but he was just like, a verbal assassin. Like he would just cut you into pieces, talk shit because he wanted to know, because very early in his career, he was winning championships and dominating. He wanted to know if you were down, like if you could take shit. Because if you could take it from him, he was like, this is a ride or die, motherfucker.
Because he would talk about stuff that it was so like if your wife got into a car accident, he would like bring that up. If your kid was like mentally disabled, he would like bring that up. If you had like a mole on your cheek, like he had no filter, no boundaries. He just went full on, and he associated this with creating a better team unit.
Which, there was a method to his madness, but his madness was so insane that you're just like, I'm surprised nobody tried to check. Like the only people from what I've gathered through the research that he really like would be, reserved or like pay attention around was like Bill Walsh when he was there, when he was the coach, but he left after '88, Joe Montana, and Ronnie Lott. Ronnie Lott was like his favorite teammate to play with. And Ronnie could always like because he hated criticism. Bill Walsh always used to say to him like, and that's what kind of got through to Haley. He's like, criticism is like beef jerky. It's good for you, but it's really tough to take down. And he was like, okay, I get it. And Ronnie Lott, was almost like an older brother to him because he was so well respected, such a veteran leader, such a badass on the field that he was like, okay, Ronnie's going to criticize me. He's going to do it in private, and I'm going to learn the game so I don't need to be criticized. Hey, everybody. Just want to take a quick break to let you know that our Sports Experience podcast is brought to you by Engle Studio here, and they're here in Tucson for all your recording needs.
Well, it's one of these things where you see he has respect and he holds back for a couple of players and his coach, but man, every other player on that football team, he just rips to shreds. And if you make a mistake, that's the thing about, we were talking about how he knows what every other player should be doing. If you make a mistake, he is fucking torturing. Like, he is just like yelling in your face. And like, I can't even imagine, because a lot of pro sports that happens, you see that with like Jordan, and they're like ripping each other for not doing what they need to do. But he
took it to an extreme.
Yes,
like
he took it to another level.
Like, Jordan seems like the guy who would do it, but do it like in practice when the cameras aren't on, or like, in a team meeting where it's like, okay, only the teammates and coaches can hear it.
But almost in a shit talking, he's kind of like shit, like whatever, not whatever, like I need to do that, but not the way Charles hated it. He was scary.
He put his dick on Matt Millen's shoulder during a poker game. Like, why? Like, this isn't something like the movie Waiting where you just surprise somebody, like, look at my wiener.
No.
No, this is like borderline sexual assault.
What were the other guys' reactions to? They were just like, that's Charles, man.
That's just Charles.
Yeah.
He got 2 sacks last weekend. Of course you can put your penis in my face.
Exactly. Of course you could just drape it on my shoulder.
You thwarted that 2-minute offense. Let's whip out that cock. Whip it out, damn it.
My thing is the GM, the head coach.
It got bad by 91.
That's the thing.
That's where we want to go with this. Yeah.
Is they had to start stepping in because it wasn't like one or two incidents. It was like he was doing it all the fucking time.
And I'm going to go into a couple of these incidents here. It wasn't just whipping out his dick.
No.
By like 91, because by 1990, Ronnie Lott was gone. Ronnie Lott signed as a Plan B free agent to Los Angeles, the Raiders at the time. Joe Montana, by 1991, he had gotten hurt in the NFC Championship game when they were going for the three-peat against the Giants. He was out the 91 and almost all the 92 seasons, and they had replaced him with Steve Young. And that really made him mad.
Yeah, and he had no respect for Steve Young.
And since Walsh was already gone by then and Seifert was the head coach, already butting heads. Mm-hmm. So by this point, he had gotten so out of control. There are a couple stories where he allegedly pissed in his backup Tim Harris's convertible because he was jealous of him. Even though he was better than him, he just said, I'm going to pee in your nice new car, douche.
Well, I feel like this is the thing where you can't really get into his mind, but I imagine in his mind, he was just like, I'm laying down the hierarchy here. Like,
oh, yeah.
I'm the lead.
I'm marking my territory.
I'm marking my territory. That's exactly where I was going with that one. Like, he's just like, I'm the head of this pack. And they're just like, we're not a pack, dude. We're a football team.
In one of the meetings, apparently around this time, his linebackers coach was criticizing him for sitting incorrectly in a chair. Just during a meeting, sitting incorrectly. So Charles got up out of the meeting, went to the restroom, came back with used doo-doo paper with doo-doo on it and threw it at the coach. And then another assistant coach, he went into his office and shit on his desk.
Yes. I feel like in the later years of his 49er, because he actually comes back and he's a 49er later in his career.
Yeah.
But in these, before he leaves, it starts to get into these poop stories. Yeah. And it's so interesting because in the beginning, it's him just jacking off where you're just like, Jesus. And then it really gets into if you say something that he doesn't like, if you do something that he misinterprets even, he's literally doing something with poop to your... Like, I can't even imagine all the stories that guys just, like, kind of kept to themselves.
Oh, totally.
They're just like, is that shit in my helmet?
Like, those are like deathbed confessions.
Yes,
almost.
exactly.
Like, you're just not getting out.
Like, look, I killed Jimmy Hoffa, and Charles, he shit in my helmet, man.
Yeah, like... But so by 1991, there's a great story, too. That year they're playing the Raiders, and Ronnie Lott's on the Raiders. So Haley, like a little brother, always wants to beat his older brother. And 91 was the first year that the Niners had missed the playoffs since, I believe, 1982. So, I mean, they had been essentially a decade in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And they lose to the Raiders, and Charles is so despondent after this game because he really wanted to beat Ronnie and kind of show him, like, hey, I'm still, keeping the ship right here. He had a nervous breakdown in the locker room, and he punched a glass window with, like, wire on it, and he completely screwed up his hand, like, just blood gushing everywhere.
Yeah, cuts everywhere.
But the 49ers trainers, because he was so inconsolable, they had to go into the Raiders locker room to get Ronnie Lott to be like, can you calm this guy down?
Oh, my God. I didn't know that.
Dude,
I heard the story about him punching the window, but not about them going and getting Ronnie to come and...
So Ronnie comes in. He ends up calming him down, and they had asked him about the incident, and he's like, look, man, that's not how I handle things, but why wouldn't you want a guy like that on your team who has so much passion and just like desire to do anything you possibly can to win and to be so upset by a loss like that?
Yeah.
Like, he was like, I understand. Like, I get it. I get why he's so mad. So by the time that season ended and the 49ers missed the playoffs because they lost their division that year to the Saints, and the Falcons, due to a tiebreaker, got into the postseason. 91 Falcons would be a good story to do with Dion and Rison and all those guys.
Oh, yeah.
That was a fun team to watch. Like, you talk about swag, that team had swag.
Yeah.
And a fat Mississippian as a third-string quarterback who turned into Brett Favre. Like, I was drinking as much as Favre during my heyday.
They asked him how he dropped 30 pounds. He just stopped drinking.
Yeah. It's like, I didn't want to be fat anymore, Mom. That's why I quit drinking. But
I moved to light beer. That's when they introduced light beer.
Pretty much, yeah.
And that's when Brett Favre's career took off.
And this is what I don't understand, though, is after the season, I get why they traded him. Okay,
Yes.
I understand why the 49ers felt like they had to trade him. I mean, he had strangled George Seifert by that point. I mean, he was getting in fights with Steve Young, who's like the most pleasant guy ever. Like,
there's something to be said about what happens in the locker room spills over onto the field for everybody else. He was probably the best pass rusher at that time, but there's something that it breaks in a locker room.
And Seifert still regrets not that he traded him, but where he traded him, because this is very important as far as the whole Charles Haley story. Because originally the Raiders were offering them the best offer.
Yes.
And the 49ers are like the antithesis at this time of the Raiders in terms of how they do business. They're like, no, he's not going to the Raiders, which honestly would have been smart because, or any other AFC team, because you trade him out of the conference, you never have to see him again.
Yes.
Never. The 49ers, however, get on the phone with Jimmy Johnson, who's the de facto GM in Dallas. The Dallas Cowboys, after the 1991 season, had finally not only ascended from their 1-15 year in 1989, they had pieces in place. That year they lost in the divisional round to the Detroit Lions, where Eric Kramer made it rain footballs for their only postseason win post-Bobby Lane curse. Check that episode out. No, seriously, if you ever watch that 91 playoff game, what you see is Barry Sanders for the first 3 quarters before he goes off as a decoy. Eric Kramer is just slicing and dicing him in this run-and-shoot offense, and Dallas doesn't have a pass rush. They have good young defensive linemen at that time, like Jimmy Jones, Russell Maryland, Leon Lett, a good veteran leader, but kind of at the back end of his career in Jim Jeffcoat, and with Chad Hennings coming back in from his Air Force enlistment. They're like really ascending, but they don't have that one piece.
But this game shows that they need a pass rusher.
They need a dominant pass rusher. And
it's completely obvious because the Lions don't have a good passing team, and they completely cut them up.
They cut them to ribbons, honestly. Willie Green, color of money, Chris Berman right there, had a great game. So anyway, Dallas offers San Francisco a 2nd and 3rd round draft pick. San Francisco trades him to Dallas. Mind you, at this time, Dallas is an 11-win team, I believe. They just, they
had Emmitt Smith. They were putting these.
They had the triplets.
I was going to say they were putting these championship pieces together.
They just needed a dominant veteran player, particularly one who could pass rush, and the 49ers hand them Charles Haley.
Gave it to him. A 2nd and 3rd round pick. This is something I don't necessarily understand with football, the value of players.
Oh, I mean, I could get into this a little bit.
Yeah.
So Jimmy Johnson and one of the analysts in Dallas when he first took over, because Jimmy was always about value in the draft and players he was familiar with. Mm-hmm. Like he never wanted to overdraft someone. If he saw somebody he wanted that might have like a lower value from where he was picking, he would always try and trade back.
Yes.
Because trading really wasn't like a thing by the late 80s in the NFL and the draft. Like obviously you'd have trades, but not like now.
Not like with what Bill Belichick was doing throughout the 2000s, just collecting picks and that kind of thing.
And what he kind of got through that and the Herschel Walker trade was like, look, draft picks are currency. We're going to go to the table. The more, whacks you have at the ball, the better, chance you have at hitting a home run. And that's what they did.
Yeah.
So the draft pick value, him and I think it was an oil speculator that Jerry Jones knew. I think that was the person. They set up a draft value chart as far as this pick is allotted this many points and so on and so on and so on, and it just keeps decreasing from the first to the last pick.
And then players are given that many points, so you don't want to trade a first-round draft pick for a guy that's not going to produce.
Yeah, and I mean, since then, the value has been, updated and things like that, but that was kind of the first thing, and it was great for GMs because they could just look at the chart and be like, okay, I'm not getting screwed in this deal. This seems like appropriate value for the type of player that I want at this area of the draft.
So and then they could track it and then go back for like later deals. So if they look at it and they're like a 3rd round is worth way more than that or less, or you know what I mean. This is the first era of tracking that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's why I think they really, they essentially stole one of the best defenders for a 2nd and 3rd round. I don't even know who the 49ers picked up. Nobody that
I know they traded one for a wide receiver for the Patriots, Vincent Brisby. I forget what the other pick turned into, but yeah, 2nd and 3rd round picks.
Yeah.
And you get a dominant pass rusher.
A Hall of Famer.
Hall of Famer. I mean, in 1991, their defense was ranked 17th. Mm-hmm. In 1992, guess where their defense was ranked?
Number one.
Number one.
Yeah.
And you talk to any of those Cowboys players, particularly like Aikman and Smith and Irvin and all those guys, they'll tell you why they took that step from losing in the divisional round to 1992, and it's Charles Haley specifically. I mean, that guy just brought such a presence on that side of the ball.
That's what I was going to say. It wasn't just his play; it was presence. I bet nobody wanted to make a mistake with him out there. That he's one of those players,
and he's the perfect guy. Even though he's a massive shit talker, you have a ton of good young defensive linemen. How are you going to make them better? Watch this guy on the field. Don't pay any attention to what he does in the locker room, but watch him on the field because you're going to learn a thing or two.
Exactly, and he's going to know what you're doing wrong, so if he yells at you, pay attention. And I felt like they really all clicked in.
Yeah.
Why he left the 49ers, the locker room essentially hated him. In Dallas,
he was beloved.
They loved him.
Everybody seemed to be a crazy person.
Yes, there were a lot of drugs in that Dallas Cowboy locker room. There was a lot of stuff going on.
And Haley was never like a drugs or a booze guy.
No,
he was
wasn't.
Just like
he was just
a chemically imbalanced person.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a story about Emmitt Smith holding out for his contract.
Yeah. Can I get into
yes,
before we do that?
Okay.
So I'm setting this up for 1992, and why Seifert made a mistake was because not only in 1992 but 1993. Guess who Dallas plays in the NFC Championship against another double-digit win team in the NFC?
Oh, I don't know. Who the
49ers.
Okay.
They went into San Francisco in 92 where the 49ers were heavily favored, kicked the crap out of them.
I was going to say.
And then went on to win the Super Bowl in 92. Okay. 93, they're playing in Dallas. That was the famous Jimmy Johnson calling the radio game. And Bernie Kosar actually came in after Aikman got a concussion and gave him the game icing score. But yeah, Haley beat him both times.
Yeah.
And you knew, and he's talked about it, that weighed heavily on his mind. Like, I'm going to stick it to these bastards.
Oh, I can't even imagine how amped up he would get for those games.
Well, I mean, Seifert's not only the head coach, but you had gotten rid of Montana and you had gotten rid of Lott, and you're on this completely dominant team with absolute confidence like the Cowboys of that era were. Mm-hmm. And you go out and just beat them down.
Yeah.
Absolutely beat them down.
That's the thing. It wasn't a close game.
And the funny thing is, you had mentioned it, and this is where I want to kind of go into it. In 93, after they're coming off a Super Bowl win, they start 0-2. The big reason they start 0-2 is because Emmitt Smith wants a new contract, and he's holding out. He wants Barry Sanders money, and Jerry Jones is kind of like, no, I'm not going to pay you. But they end up starting 0-2, and they lost to the Bills in that second game at Texas Stadium. And so, Chris, take it away.
Well, this is the kind of I don't even know how to put it. The kind of influence he had in the locker room in Dallas was he was so angry after they lost that game against Buffalo that he literally headbutted through a concrete wall. I would love to see pictures of it, but people say he literally charged and went through a concrete wall.
And not only that, Jerry Jones, because he's like the most hands-on owner in professional sports, came down to the locker room. Charles Haley took his helmet, threw it at him, missed by about 2 feet, and yelled something to the extent of, "Get our blanking running back in here." Because he understood the value of Emmitt Smith.
Yeah, and then I think a couple of days later, they were like, all right, we'll sign Emmitt back.
I believe that was the first team. I think there have been a couple since then, but that was the first team ever in the Super Bowl era to start 0-2 and win a Super. And they had to really come back because that year the Giants under Dan Reeves in his first year were also very competitive. They had to win a last week game against the Giants at the Meadowlands to win the division and get the bye. Because if they don't do that, they're going on the road as a wild card, and who knows what happens. I mean, obviously they could have won the Super Bowl that way, but they made the path that much easier, and they got home field advantage for the playoffs.
I was going to say, you never know what happens. The what if they didn't have home field advantage. I want to go back to the thought process of not only throwing your helmet at your boss, but the owner of a football team. Like he is so much above. It's not like your coach. It's not like the whatever. Yeah. Like he literally the not rational thinking that Charles had throughout his entire career is just
But you know what it kind of
crazy.
You know what it kind of is like though, is because he's that good and that well respected as a football player, despite all the other insane bullshit that he put people through, whenever he talked, when it mattered, not just like shit talking, but like when it mattered, people listened. People listened to him.
And that's why that Dallas Cowboy team really turned around and became one of the best defensive teams and multiple Super Bowl teams.
Because when Jimmy Johnson took that team over, it was very young. He had cut every tie from the Landry era. All these guys are young. They're hungry. They're very good. You don't have a guy with Super Bowl experience. You don't have a guy who's part of a competent organization. Who are you going to ask questions to? You're going to ask questions to Charles Haley.
Yep.
He might, put his wiener in your face while you're asking said questions, but he's going to answer them, and you're going to listen.
I would love to hear what Jimmy Johnson has to say about his leadership role and some of the stories, because those are the guys you don't get the stories from.
Jimmy Johnson had a great quote because he was like, look, I want this guy, but I got to know. So he started asking the 49ers front office about him. Then he had all of his players call all the 49ers players, and they all said that he was crazy, but he was very smart. And Jimmy Johnson said basically, oh, he's smart. I can reason with a smart person.
Yes.
I don't have to pay attention to the crazy. I can at least reason with them.
Or he could reason out the crazy. Yeah. It was what he thought.
And
no.
Yeah.
But he had that high of football intelligence that it didn't it did matter, but it didn't spill over, especially in Dallas. He fucking just dominated.
Yeah. And I mean, 3 Super Bowls in 4 years is testament to the type of player that he was.
Yep.
Before his back issue started kind of kicking in and him really
that's
declining.
That's when they started to really assess his psychological disorder, because they were saying that he was manic depressed in that time, but he had manic depression in that time, but it turned out he was bipolar, so that's why he had all these huge mood swings.
Yeah, he'd just be as high as possible one day, low, high, and nobody could really get a beat on him and try and get him to, at least play by the rules.
Yes, at least play by the rules just a tiny bit.
Just
that was just
tiny bit.
Not who he was.
Not at all. But yeah, that's
the great Charles Haley.
That is the great Charles Haley. Make sure you check out Boys Will Be Boys. Check out his story of wrapping his dick in athletic tape and running naked through the locker room saying he's the last naked warrior.
Yep.
That's always good. Him putting his wiener next to a desk and top of it while his cornerback was sitting in front of him. I mean, just an absolute peach, Charles Haley.
Yeah, if you were on one of those teams and you didn't see his penis, then I just don't...
Were you really there?
Exactly.
Were you really there?
I get you got the ring, but did you see the cock? Because that's it. This is the Sports Experience Podcast. I'm Chris Quinn at C. Quinn Comedy.
I'm Dom DiTolla at DiTolla Dominic.
Join us every Wednesday and Friday. And check us out at the Sports Experience Podcast on Instagram.
Cool, everybody. Thank you.